find it a lot harder to kind of be in a routine where you're eating well.
When I'm revising and when you spend so much time sitting down on the desk, it's so easy to get bored, to go to the fridge.
I'm very strict on what time I should eat. So lunchtime, 12 o'clock, 12:15.
You kind of binge a bit more, you go to the kitchen for a snack and you end up picking up a biscuit or a chocolate bar or something.
If I wake up and I don't have breakfast, I get hangry, you know.
Hello, I'm Kritika Adatia and I'm a chartered accountant. I now support accountancy students through their training. And as an educator, I'm regularly up close and personal with some of the common issues people face while studying for and sitting their accountancy exams. So in this series for the ACCA, I'm chatting to experts about strategies we can all use when facing some of life's challenges. This week, we're looking at nutrition. How does what we eat affect our mood? What is the gut-brain axis? And what small changes can we make that can help out our bodies in the long run? This is On Your Marks, because you'll never know until you try. For the longest time, I didn't really think about how what I ate could impact me beyond just filling my stomach. When I was a student studying for my accountancy exams, it wasn't exactly mindful of my diet. It was more about convenience than anything else. But as I've gotten older and maybe a little wiser, I've started to really understand how much what we eat shapes how we feel, not just physically, but mentally too. It's fascinating to think about the connection between food and our brain power. So to dig into the role of nutrition in our well-being, I'm joined today by Dr Emily Prpa. She has a PhD in nutrition from King's College London and is actually the nutritionist for leading brands, including Yakult. So Emily, I'm going to start with what seems like an obvious question, but why is nutrition so important?
Great question to kick us off, I think. So good nutrition is absolutely crucial for both our physical and mental well-being. Essentially, if you think about the food that you eat, it's providing your body and your brain with all the fuel that it needs in order to perform optimally. And I think the way I always love to think about it is when you are consuming food, it is the one way in which you are literally taking in the world around you. You are consuming it via essentially your gut. Yeah.
That sounds great. I love that. You're consuming the world around you inside. Yeah. That's brilliant. So Emily, you mentioned the gut. Now, when I think of the gut, I'm thinking stomach, but I know it's probably a lot more. Could you tell us a little bit about what exactly is the gut?
Yeah, absolutely. Your gut refers to this 9 meters long tube, and it goes from your mouth all the way through to the exit at the other end. It's how we digest our food. And that way we can absorb the nutrients through our gut to help our brain and body feel its best. What we're now discovering is that the gut itself could actually hold the key to unlock so many of the health concerns that we experience today. And that's because of this little thing that we call the gut microbiome. So your gut microbiome is essentially the home of trillions and trillions of bacteria that live in your gut. Now, when I say bacteria, most people think
bad guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's why we fall poorly. Bad bacteria is why we pick up viruses and things like this. But actually, when we talk about the gut microbiome and the bacteria that are living in our gut, we are seeing that actually they are communicating with so many different organs and systems in the body that we're now discovering the gut could be this long forgotten organ that we once really just took for granted, thought it was merely involved in digestion. But actually, we're now seeing that because the role it plays beyond digestion by talking to things like our immune system, our skin, our hormones, our brain, it can have a profound impact on our overall health and well-being. And, gut health overall now and the gut microbiome's research is absolutely exploding. Everyone wants to know more and more about it. And we're now calling it even like the second brain. And we're all very excited about this research and how it can impact our mood and well-being. But for me personally, I think it's quite funny that we're now seeing it as like the new craze and the new thing that could, and I do believe that it could be the cornerstone for modern medicine. But it's funny because, these bacteria, which, like we said, used to just think that, well, they just served a purpose for digestion or that they were causing us something bad whenever we thought bacteria. But as humans, we evolved on a microbial planet. There was never a time that you and I, as humans, lived without these bacteria living inside of us. So really, is it any wonder that now we're kind of suss up that, oh, okay, they could actually be doing us some good?
Amazing. There's so many things I want to unpack there. But I'm going to start with the question. You mentioned the gut microbiome. They're actually bacteria, but they're good guys. They're not the bad guys. How can we nurture them is my first question. And then also, what impact is that having on the sort of gut-brain connection? Because you mentioned the brain a couple of times. So we'll start with that.
Yeah, great question. I see it as there's 5 sort of pillars for gut health and to help look after your gut microbiome. Them being diet, which we can go into, exercise, sleep, making sure you're getting enough sleep, hydration, and sort of stress management. There's no silver bullet, I'm afraid to say. They're kind of the stuff that requires effort, but they're also, those are the kind of pillars that, especially when it comes to nutrition, and everyone's looking for a quick fix and these kind of things. But really, when it comes to gut health, it's these simple basics and small little things you can do each day. It's a high fiber diet, it's whole foods, it's your whole grains, your fruits, your vegetables, it's that kind of thing. When it comes to exercise, it's, moving your body in any way you can. For anyone that's working overtime, we never think we can actually get enough time in. But it's as simple as taking the stairs rather than taking the lift, little tweaks that you can do. Sleep, this is where I personally struggle. But this can have such a profound impact on your gut microbiome. And when I say that, I'm talking about this balance of the bacteria. So when we're trying to strive for these 5 pillars, what we're really trying to do is make sure that we have this very diverse gut microbiome. And when we're not sleeping enough, we actually impact that balance of the bacteria in our gut, where we are shifting the scales towards more bad bacteria rather than the good. And the same goes true with sort of stress. So that's why it's really important that we're managing our stress as best as possible. And this is where that gut-brain connection comes in. So I've said how the gut is now being referred to as the second brain. And this is because of this gut-brain connection that we're now discovering more and more about. And if you think about it, your brain is kind of talking to all your organs in your body. You'll know this. But actually, your gut talks back to your brain. And
interesting.
The gut-brain connection is referring to this two-way communication that happens between the brain and the gut. And when we look at the research, we actually see that in terms of that two-way communication, the majority of communication is going from your gut back to your brain. And it's, yeah, and it's about 90% of the communication. And a lot of that communication happens by the gut bacteria getting nice and chatty with the brain. And that communication isn't just your gut saying, I'm full, I'm hungry. We now know actually there's so much more than that. And if we put this into context, this idea of your gut thinking, how many times in the English language or from day to day do you say, I've got this like gut instinct, or I've got butterflies in my stomach, or, you've got a presentation at work and you're like, I feel sick to my stomach. All of these are real life examples of your gut brain connection at play in real time. It's in our English language. So it's not that far for us to think about this gut-brain connection and how it's all coming into play. We don't really have, in terms of how, I know they're kind of like examples, and you'll have personal examples of where you've like listened to your gut, say. But in terms of then how we can see the gut-brain axis in real time, in real play, in humans at least, is with patients with IBS. So IBS is irritable bowel syndrome, and it affects about 10 to 20% of the population, and more women actually. And it causes really uncomfortable symptoms, bloating, cramping, and they can come and go, and diet can definitely trigger these symptoms, and it really impacts a person's quality of life. But what we see with people with IBS is that their symptoms worsen during periods of stress and anxiety, and that individuals with IBS are more likely to experience poor mental health. So what that means is that in terms of therapies, we can not only just target the diet, but also the brain side of things. And from a day-to-day point of view, you might have experienced this kind of idea that you might have a meal one day and you'll feel totally fine. You won't have any digestive problems, but you'll eat the same meal the next day. But on that second day, you've had a particularly stressful time. You've been stuck in traffic, or the tube hasn't arrived. From the minute you woke up to the minute you've gone to bed, it's just been stress. And you'll have that same meal, and you might then actually have a flare-up of uncomfortable digestive symptoms. And that is your gut-brain connection. That has nothing to do with the diet, but everything to do with your mental state at that time. I don't know if you can relate.
Honestly,
you're nodding.
I'm nodding because I'm like, that resonates. And I know when I've had an anxious day or a particularly stressful day, I feel it in my gut.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot more so now that I'm getting older.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm so much more cognizant of my gut reacting to things that I eat, particularly on days when I'm feeling anxious or stressful. I mean, you've said some incredible things through the answer of the connection with the gut brain. So what I'm hearing you say, and please do correct me if I've misinterpreted, is that our gut is essentially our second brain. And there is a lot of communication happening from the gut to the brain, more so than we think. And actually, we need to nourish our gut. And you spoke about the 5 things that we could do, one of which is diet. And actually, I want to go into that a little bit more. But it's also things like exercise, hydration, stress, sort of managing that. So really just picking up on that point, what sorts of foods, I suppose, should students be thinking about consuming? I know you mentioned fibers, but could we go a little bit deeper in terms of what sort of diet and nutritional things should students be considering consuming when they're trying to avoid maybe stress or anxiety or...
Yeah, great question. So I think when it comes to sort of a gut health friendly diet, I mentioned fiber, and I will bang on that fiber drum until I come home. Honestly, every single day I'm like fiber, fiber, fiber. And that is honestly because we're not getting enough of it. But when I think fiber, and if I was to tell you fiber is the backbone for plant foods, people are now going to start to worry and they're going, I knew it, she's going to tell me I need to go vegan. Because you think plant, you think, okay, that's just fruits and vegetables. But I promise you, I'm not saying that. But what you really want to be doing, and students, we've not got a lot of time, is are there simple swaps you can do in your everyday diet that can increase your fiber intake? Because fiber is also found in whole grains, it's found in nuts and seeds, as well as legumes. So all your beans, pulses, lentils, those kind of things. So if we took breakfast, let's take your breakfast. How about we play that game and see what simple swaps we can do of how you can then up your fiber intake really kind of easily.
Okay, well, do you know what, Emily? I'm actually someone that's been looking into nutrition,
okay,
so I have
it's
swapped out.
Okay.
So this morning I did have a rolled oat smoothie.
Okay.
And so I chucked in that a banana, a couple of frozen berries. I had chia seeds, flax seeds, and plant-based soya milk in there as well.
A-star student.
Yay!
Very good. So yeah, if you can make it whole grain oats, fantastic.
Yeah.
I heard you also say sort of flax seeds and chia seeds.
Yes.
So they're great sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, omega-3 fatty acids are really important in brain development. They're a type of essential fat, type of unsaturated fat that we can't actually make in the human body. So we have to require it from food. And we typically get that from oily fish. So things like salmon, mackerel, these kind of things.
Emily, what if you're vegetarian?
Well, there's your walnuts and
walnuts,
your walnuts,
right,
flax seeds and chia seeds are
okay.
fantastic sources of omega-3. And we also see omega-3s are really high also in sort of the Mediterranean style diet. So whenever I'm talking about diet, I always like to think about it as like an overall dietary approach. We can get very bogged down in the details, but it's what your diet looks overall. In terms of the research, what we see is for stress-related psychiatric disorders like depression and like anxiety, the Mediterranean diet kind of comes up on top in terms of providing us with the lowest risk of those sort of diseases. So that's a diet that's particularly high in all your whole natural sort of plant foods, whole grains, but also great sources of healthy fats like your extra virgin olive oil and, the healthy omega-3s and things. So yeah, diet. So your breakfast, a great starting point, but it's things like getting in as much fiber as possible. And if you could then change possibly your plant-based milk to maybe a sort of fermented milk option. What fermented foods do is that rather than when we focus on fiber, what we're doing is we're providing our bacteria with their favorite food. That's why I bang on about fiber so much, is because it's your gut bacteria, especially the healthy, good bacteria, their favorite food. They munch on it. They produce all these really useful substances to us. But when you take fermented foods, you're taking a source of the live, good, friendly bacteria already. So you're hoping that it's kind of like a cheat, right? So rather than just feeding your already existing gut microbiome and the bacteria down there, you're hoping to get a source of the live, good stuff to add to that pool already down there. So you can do that through sort of fermented milk drinks, fermented yogurts. Whenever you're kind of looking for fermented foods, you want to make sure that the product says, it contains live bacteria. Even better if it has something like reaches the gut alive, because then you're getting bang for your buck. You know that bacteria is going to reach the other bacteria in your gut whilst being alive, because that's where kind of the magic can happen, and it can increase the other friendly bacteria and really increase your gut microbiome diversity, which is essentially what we're all looking for. You want as diverse gut microbiome as possible. Kind of picture it like a rainforest. If you imagine a rainforest, this is an ecosystem, very much in balance, but it's also thriving with lots of different species, plants, birds, and that kind of thing. And that's what you're really trying to do with your diet. through things like fermented foods, but also fiber, and those healthy fats and other compounds like polyphenols, which are found in lots of like colourful fruits and vegetables. So when it comes to diet, it's really the basics of what we consider to be quote unquote a healthy diet. But in terms of then really putting that to practice, particularly for your audience, simple swaps along the day, like if you're always snacking on peanuts, say, can you make it mixed nuts? Because that way you're getting lots of different fibers all in one. Can you, rather than, say, if you're on the go and you're buying a salad, or you're always just buying kind of like the plain salad, could you buy the one with like extra grated carrot, extra grated beetroot, getting in as much diversity in terms of that plant foods realm as possible? Because we quite literally are, what we eat when it comes to our gut microbiome. So the more diverse you can make your diet, the more diverse your gut microbiome is going to be.
So what I'm hearing you say is that variety is key. And just again, circling back to something you said earlier, the healthier our gut is going to be, the knock-on implications it's going to have on our brain. But also touching on a point that you've just raised in terms of swapping things out. And I'm kind of putting myself in the shoes of our listener or our student, and also myself when I was a student, opting for convenience and that microwave meal or that ready meal. Like what substitutes are there for that? Are there specific things that students or listeners can be doing to bring in more of that variety?
Yeah, I would say, convenience, especially during stressful times, is always going to win over, going and cooking a Mediterranean style dinner. I totally hear you. I do this myself. I'm someone that needs to grab and go at times. But what I want people to sort of remember is this notion that gut health and improving your gut-brain connection via diet is all about inclusion, not exclusion. So if you are buying that ready meal, that's absolutely fine. But is there something else you can add to it that will provide a source of, say, fibre, for example? So take soup. Could you add some mixed beans into that as you're popping it in the microwave? Or they've got those like sachets now of sort of whole grain mixes that you can pop it, like it's like bulgur wheat and quinoa all in one, and you just pop it in the microwave. Can you add that to your soup? Because not only are you then getting sort of like more of a complex meal, but you're going to be fuller for longer whilst also adding that plant diversity to your dishes.
Perfect. So just to repeat again, and I love repetition because for me it's certainly retention. So you're saying it's not about exclusion, it's including something additional to make sure you're giving your gut microbe the nutrients it needs. Now we keep referring to fiber, which I hear is really important. Are there any other important nutrients for brain health that might help students or aid their sort of learning or brain foods? I know you alluded to some earlier as well.
Yeah, so definitely omega-3s for sure. But also we're seeing some really interesting research on prebiotics. So I'm sorry, I'm going to bring up fibre again because some fibres are by definition prebiotics. Essentially a prebiotic is a substrate like fibre that is used by your gut microbes that can have a health benefit. And there's some really interesting research looking at prebiotics. And prebiotics can be found in, onion, leeks, garlic, these kind of things. But particular supplements are being looked at in the research, and we're seeing that they can have an impact on our cognition. So that is simply our thinking processes, but even prebiotics having an effect on our memory and things like this. So yeah, your prebiotics can be things like artichokes, leeks, onion, garlic, all the good smelling stuff. So yeah.
To be honest, I'm Indian, so garlic and onion is like a staple in our diet.
There you go, you're getting your prebiotics in. How's your cognition?
Hopefully okay. Brilliant. I just want to turn our attention to stress and anxiety. I know these were some of the emotions that we touched on earlier. These are probably emotions that our students feel a lot more during busy study and revision periods. We know it's not good for the gut. I think you alluded to that earlier in your answer. But what exactly is happening to our gut when we are stressed and when we are anxious?
Yeah. So I think it's first of all to say, we talk a lot about stress and it gets a bad rep, and rightly so. So many of us are stressed, and particularly during exam times. But, just enough stress and life is engaging, it's challenging. We're living a fulfilled life a lot of the time. But it's just when it gets dialed up too much. So I just want to start by saying that because, stress is a natural response. But a lot of the time what it does is too much of it increases levels of stress hormones like cortisol in our body. And essentially it sends our body into a fight or flight response, which, was an evolutionary response which allowed us to survive as human beings, run away from tigers and these kind of things. But because of that evolutionary response, the blood flow then diverts away from the gut. It goes to, our muscles, so we can quite literally flee from that lion or whatever it was. But now, so when you have these high levels of cortisol and the blood is moving away from the gut, your digestion can slow down. We can have digestive problems, but also that cortisol increase as well can increase the permeability of your gut. And what I mean by that is it allows for what we would call sort of a leaky gut. And that means that certain toxins and undigested food particles that should remain in the gut can actually leak out into your bloodstream. This can then cause inflammatory response, so increased inflammation, but also it weakens our immune system. So we're more likely to kind of fall ill when we're stressed and things like that, which is never good when usually we're stressed when we really need to be performing. So it's really vital that we're kind of looking after ourselves as best as possible during that time.
Wow, I didn't realise a lot of your immune system and the impact of that also resides in your gut, and that has knock-on impact.
Oh, huge. So actually your 70% of your immune cells live in the gut.
Wow.
And it's actually your gut bacteria that train your immune system from the very beginning, from the moment you're born. And it's funny because I think we always just think that the immune system just kicks into action when we've got cold or flu. But it is constantly working in the background, and it's actually your gut bacteria that is the powerhouse that is driving your immune system.
So essentially, when we are stressed or anxious, we should try and find ways to relax ourselves, because not only is that going to help us mentally, but also it seems that's going to have impacts on our gut.
Yeah, the mind-body connection is very much a real thing. I think it's one of those things that was seen as quite woo-woo, but we're now actually, because of the gut and its role on the impact on the brain, we're now seeing that actually we've got to wake up to this and stop seeing kind of the brain as its own separate entity, because it's not. I know we always talk about mental health being different from physical health, but I don't think we can afford to do that anymore because of the impact of the gut microbiome. Like, it is literally everywhere, and we need to start taking this more holistic approach to health.
Just want to touch on something that's perhaps more of a concern or a challenge nowadays, and that's just social media feeding us information about good nutrition, all these diets that now seem to be mainstream. What are your views and opinions on that? Are there certain things that students should perhaps be not taking advice from? Are there diets to avoid? Could you just give us a little bit of your insight and views on that?
How long have you got?
I know that's a big question.
No, it's a great question, something I'm really passionate about. So I know we were speaking earlier, but there was this study back in April that showed that only 2% of nutrition and health information on TikTok is accurate. And that to me is, I don't even know where to begin, especially when it comes to kind of gut health. Misinformation is huge. I know that there was this big trend about kind of colon cleanses, and that is honestly like pouring bleach on your gut microbiome.
Okay.
You don't want to be doing that. We want to be building this thing up. So yeah, in terms of, I think people need to be very careful about where they are taking their information from, and making sure that, I think it's one of those things when it comes to social media and certain messages, and even just sometimes the wellness industry overall providing us with the next kind of silver bullet. I think it's just really important to know that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I wish I could come in here and tell you, take this and you're going to be thinking the best you've ever thought and having all of these creative ideas and you're going to retain all of this information. But unfortunately, there never is that silver bullet. And it really does come back to those kind of 5 key things that I spoke about earlier. It's looking after your diet, making sure you're moving your body in a way that feels good for you, prioritizing your sleep, getting a little bit of mindfulness, whatever that is, 3 deep breaths, whatever it looks like for you, and getting in enough hydration. I think when it comes to nutrition, we always focus on food and we always kind of forget about hydration. It's like, oh, actually, maybe you don't need, the protein bar or whatever it is today. Have you drank enough water? And maybe that could actually be something that a lot of people are missing out on a lot of the time.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that hydration point, because I'm someone who started to implement, just more water on a day-to-day basis. And I realize on days when I don't drink as much water, I almost get a headache.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And dehydration, so typically dehydration as well, can absolutely cause headaches, as well as one of the leading causes of constipation for most people as
Yes.
well. And it's right in front of us. Like,
it goes back to your fibre point as well. Is water going to help with, I suppose,
100
movements? And
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it gets everything going. But also when you start upping your fibre intake, definitely start increasing your water intake as well, because fibre draws water into the bowel. So you basically need more of it to keep everything well lubricated, so you don't get that kind of traffic jam that we're all trying to avoid basically in our digestive tract.
Brilliant. Just one more question that I sort of want to wrap up with, and it's this idea that when you are stressed and anxious and you've got all these things to worry about, I know you've given some incredible tips and sort of relatively straightforward tips for students to implement in their diet. Food becomes one of those things that's like the last thing you want to really think about. Now, what advice would you be to that listener who's sitting there thinking, oh, another thing I need to think about?
Great question. I think it's really important to remember that you're doing the best you can. And sometimes the stress of figuring out, oh my goodness, how can I get the most healthy food in front of me isn't worth it. Just because I think the mind-body connection is so strong. I think if there's just little things that you can do, like I say, if it does need to be that ready meal, but you can add something else to it, that's going to go a long way. And just don't let yourself get bogged down with it all, because like you say, you've got enough to worry about. And sometimes those pillars, those 5 pillars, as simple as they seem, when the world's just feeling a little bit too big for us, they are the hardest things for us to feel like we're on top of. And so we start, reaching for the silver bullet or the quick fix. And I think if you can just take a step back and tell yourself, do you know what? I'm doing the best I can right now and I'm going to take the ready meal, then do. As a nutritionist, I'm going to tell you that food is so much more than the sum of its parts. And if that offers you a little bit of comfort in that moment so that you can crack on the next day, then I would encourage you to do that.
So my guilty pleasure, a bar of chocolate would be okay then?
I'll have one with you now.
Brilliant. And a tradition for this episode is that we wrap up with 3 top tips or takeaways you'd want our listeners to take from this episode. So what would be those 3 things for you?
Remember the simple things when it comes to nutrition. So they really are the messages that your granny used to tell you and her granny before that. It's eat your fruits and vegetables, and sit down and enjoy your meal kind of away from your desk if you can. And think about very much what you can add to your diet as opposed to take away. So think positively of how you can fuel your body as best. And I would say if you can keep that as gut friendly as possible, every time you're sitting down for a meal, you are literally feeding trillions and trillions of little friends inside of you. And just remember that their favorite food is fiber. My second point would be hydration. Don't forget to drink some water, please. And I know that sounds so simple, but really, I think sometimes when it comes to gut health, it's one of the first things that we kind of forget about, especially when we're focusing so much on nutrition. And we can even add things into that, like simple, if you've got just a small mug in front of you, but you're going to be sat at your desk for a time, it allows your sitting period to be broken up. And there's this idea of like exercise snacking. So all those small little things you can do throughout your day. So then you're adding a little bit more movement into your day. So there you go. Have a small glass of water and keep filling it up. And my final one would be to prioritize sleep because of that kind of stress sleep cycle. If we can get hold of our sleep, I really do believe sleep is one of the most underrated pillars of our health overall. And I know that can be so difficult to do. I am also in that camp, I promise you. But it's as simple as, having a really strict routine. And I know I say it sounds simple, but it can be very difficult to have that discipline. But wake up every day and go to bed every night at the same time. I think we always think this sleep routine happens only in the evening, but it actually all starts in the morning before, and being as strict as you can with yourself in that first period. One thing I want to add, just from a personal thing that I've been doing, because I am a terrible sleeper, is kind of having everyone talks about intermittent fasting, right, when it comes to diet, but I've been implementing it in terms of like a digital intermittent fast where I don't allow myself on my phone, emails, anything digital in the first hour of waking. And personally, I'm seeing it's really helping. So yeah, just kind of creating a routine that works for you and very much sticking with it. And just remember that it really is all the small, simple things in life. And same with these tiny, tiny little microbes living inside of us, they have a powerful impact on your health, and all the little things you can do each day are going to do exactly that by looking after them.
Amazing. And I'm so glad you mentioned sleep because we do have an exciting episode for our students on sleep as well. So, and the little friendly microbes that I've learnt about through today's conversation. Thank you so much, Emily. That's been really insightful.
I'm glad. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's it from this episode of On Your Marks. Thank you, Emily, for joining me today. For more information about ACCA exams, you can go to www.acccaglobal.com/exams. See you next time. I'm Kritika Adatia, and this has been On Your Marks.